The moment Dacian Dragomir materialized from the shadows of Sienna Sterling's archive, she did not scream. She did not knock over her coffee or stumble backward into the towering shelves of ancient manuscripts that lined every wall of the Halcyon Institute's restricted lower vault. She simply looked up from the leather-bound registry she had been cross-referencing, pushed her reading glasses up the bridge of her nose, and said, with perfect calm, "You are 3 days later than I expected, Lord Dragomir." The silence that followed was the kind that had weight to it, the kind that pressed against eardrums and made the air feel thick. He was everything the old court records described him as, and somehow more. 6 feet and 4 inches of absolute stillness, white hair pulled back from a face that belonged on a Renaissance ceiling fresco, pale as marble and just as unreadable, his eyes with a deep burgundy of old wine, lit from within by something cold and ancient and unmistakably predatory. He wore a dark charcoal coat over a fitted black shirt, modern enough to move through the streets of contemporary London without attracting attention. But the way he carried himself made the clothes irrelevant. He moved like the city owed him a debt it had forgotten to pay. "You were expecting me," he said. It was not a question. His voice was low and smooth, with the faint architectural lilt of Eastern European consonants, centuries of refinement layering every syllable. "I was expecting someone," Sienna said, setting her pen down carefully. The registry entry for the Dragomir Covenant was accessed from an external terminal 6 weeks ago. The access signature was a ghost protocol, which means vampire court encryption, the only court with authorization codes that old is yours. She folded her hands on the open book. And the document accessed was the blood law transcript from 1887, the one that names your vulnerability. The temperature in the room dropped 3 degrees. She felt it on the back of her arms. That document, Dacian said, each word measured and deliberate, was classified under 7 sovereign seals. 8, Sienna corrected. You missed the one your own court archivist added in 1923. He was very thorough. Pity nobody read his footnotes. She paused. I did. Dacian crossed the room. He moved the way large predators moved, with an economy of motion that was almost hypnotic, each step deliberate and without sound. He stopped on the other side of her work table, and up close the sheer power radiating from him was something she had to consciously not react to. He was dangerous in the way a fault line beneath a city was dangerous. Quiet until it was not. You know what I came here to do, he said. Silence me, Sienna said evenly. Yes, his burgundy gaze held hers, and she did not look away. Because she had spent 2 years preparing for this exact moment, and she was not going to waste it by flinching. Then you understand, he said slowly, that you are not afraid. I understand, she said. That killing me would be a spectacular waste. Because I am the only person in the world who knows not just your weakness, but who accessed that transcript and why. And that second part is the part that should terrify you far more than I do. Something shifted in his expression, barely perceptible. But she had read enough faces across enough negotiating tables to recognize the moment when calculation replaced instinct. Explain, he said, and that was how it began. Sienna Sterling had been the senior archivist at the Halcyon Institute for 4 years before she understood what the Halcyon Institute actually was. On the surface, it was a privately funded archive and research library in central London, specializing in pre-modern European history, esoteric manuscripts, and what the public catalogue listed as mythological studies. The building itself was a converted Georgian townhouse, 4 stories above ground and 2 below, and the below-ground levels were the ones that mattered. The Halcyon Institute was, in fact, one of 12 sanctioned repositories maintained under the Accord of Pale Nations, a treaty ratified in secret in 1847 between 3 vampire courts and the human governing bodies that had, at that point, become impossible for those courts to ignore. The treaty established rules of coexistence. Humans would maintain certain archives, protect certain histories, and ensure that the blood laws governing vampire society were preserved in formats that neither time nor fire nor political upheaval could erase. In exchange, the vampire courts provided financial support, political protection in human institutions, and a guarantee that their populations would not feed on uninformed citizens. It was, as treaties went, surprisingly functional. Sienna had discovered the true nature of her employer on a Tuesday afternoon, when she had gone looking for a misplaced file and found instead a sealed sub-vault containing 3,000 years of vampire court records. She had sat down on the cold stone floor and read for 11 hours straight. By the time she emerged, she had made two decisions. The first was that she was going to become the most knowledgeable human authority on vampire court history and blood law that had ever existed. The second was that she was going to use that knowledge to protect herself, because she had also read enough to understand that humans who knew too much tended to develop a habit of disappearing. The 1887 blood law transcript had come to her attention 18 months into her self-education. It was buried in a collection of documents transferred from a Viennese estate following the death of its human custodian, one of the old families who had served vampire courts for generations. The transcript detailed a binding made between the Dragomir court, the oldest and most powerful of the three original signatory courts, and a rival bloodline that had since been destroyed. The binding was a mutual vulnerability clause, written into the blood law itself. It stated that the Lord of the Dragomir court, in accepting sovereign authority, also accepted a specific weakness tied to the ancient covenant his line had made with the original Pale court. The weakness was not physical. It was not sunlight, which affected all vampires equally, or silver, which was largely a myth. The Dragomir weakness was a name, a true name, the kind that existed in the old language before writing formalized it. Spoken aloud in the presence of the Dragomir Lord by someone holding the original covenant document. If spoken correctly, it would strip Dacian Dragomir of his ability to use compulsion, his ability to shift form, and his ability to access the full depth of his ancient power for exactly one lunar cycle. In the right hands, it was a leash. In the wrong hands, it was an execution order. Sienna had found the transcript. She had found the footnotes. She had found the name, and then she had locked it away, because she was an archivist and not an assassin, and because she had also found something else in those documents that changed everything, evidence that someone else was looking for it. She explained all of this to Dacian Dragomir in the quiet of the lower vault, with the fluorescent lights buzzing softly overhead and the ancient manuscripts watching from their shelves like witnesses. She spoke methodically, the way she did everything, laying out facts in logical sequence and watching his expression shift from controlled threat to controlled attention. When she finished, the silence stretched for a long moment. "Who?" he said. "Vasil Cerna," Sienna said. "He accessed the external terminal. He used your court's encryption codes, which means he either stole them or someone inside your court gave them to him." She slid a printed document across the table toward him. "This is the access log, the timestamp, the IP origin trace, and the session duration. Vasil Cerna spent 47 minutes in the transcript file. He did not find what he was looking for because I had already moved it, but he will come back." Dacian looked at the document. His jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. Then he looked up at her, and for the first time the cold calculation in his expression had something else beneath it. Something that recognized the value of what she had just handed him. "You moved the transcript," he said. "I moved the critically pages. The access copy still exists and still appears complete to anyone searching the catalogue. But the page containing the covenant name is in a location only I know." "And you are telling me this," he said carefully, instead of using it. "I am telling you this because the person who wants to use it against you has already killed 2 people to get here," Sienna said. "A custodian in Vienna and a research assistant in Prague. Both were connected to the Viennese estate transfer. Both deaths were ruled accidents." She met his eyes. "I am not interested in being the third." Dacian was very still for a moment. Then he did something she had not expected. He pulled out the chair across the table from her and sat down. He sat across from her as though they were colleagues, as though the preceding 10 minutes had not included the implicit threat of her silencing, and he said, "Tell me everything you know about Vasil Cerna." And she did, because she had spent 2 years preparing for this conversation, and because the look on his face when he sat down was not the look of a predator who had decided to spare her. It was the look of a man who had just realized he had walked into a room expecting to be the one with all the information, and found himself thoroughly, unexpectedly outmatched. She found, to her own surprise, that she liked it on him. Vasil Cerna was not a name Dacian had spoken aloud in 40 years. He had trained himself not to, the same way a person trained themselves not to touch a scar that had not yet finished healing. Vasil was a fourth-generation Cerna, the last surviving member of a bloodline that had been formally stripped of court, standing in 1981, after attempting to forge documents that would have given them claim to the Dragomir Eastern Territories. The stripping had been done legally. According to the blood law, in front of 3 sovereign witnesses, it had been humiliating and permanent. Apparently, Dacian reflected, he had misjudged how permanent. He spent 3 hours in the lower vault with Sienna Sterling, and by the end of those 3 hours, he had revised his understanding of the situation entirely. He had arrived expecting to find a frightened human who had stumbled onto dangerous information and needed to be dealt with quickly and cleanly. Perhaps with a memory alteration, perhaps with a simple relocation. Instead, he had found a woman who had built herself into an expert on his court's own history, who had connected threads that 3 of his own intelligence operatives had missed, and who was offering him a partnership based entirely on the logic that she was more useful alive and cooperative than silenced. She was right. He disliked how straightforwardly right she was. She was also, he noticed against his better judgment, remarkable to look at. Not in the decorative way of the court women who moved through his world like beautiful furniture, arranged for aesthetic and political purpose. Sienna Sterling was remarkable the way a well-made blade was remarkable, in the precision of her and the evident purpose. She had warm brown skin and dark eyes that moved constantly, cataloguing and assessing, and her hands, when she gestured over documents, were the hands of someone who had spent years in physical relationship with paper and ink and the weight of old things. Her hair was pulled back practically. She had ink on her left wrist. She had faced him down in the first 30 seconds without a tremor in her voice. He found this unreasonably compelling and chose not to examine why. "I need to take the original transcript pages," he said when they had finished going through everything she had assembled. "No," Sienna said. He looked at her. "Those pages are evidence," she said. "If Vasil Cerna is using stolen court encryption codes, that alone is a blood law violation. If he killed the Vienna custodian and the Prague assistant, that is 2 murders with political motive. You need the transcript pages as documentation when you bring the case before the Pale Court. If you remove them from this archive, they lose their sanctioned status and become inadmissible under Accord Protocol." She paused. "I know the Accord Protocols." "Clearly," he said, and something in the word was not entirely irritated. It was almost underneath the precision of it, close to appreciation. "I also," she continued, "know that the Pale Court has not convened a full tribunal in 22 years, which means that whatever you do about Vasil Cerna will need to be airtight, because the other court lords will be looking for any procedural error to use against you." She leaned forward slightly. "Let me help you. You are a human archivist," he said. "I am the human archivist who has already done more investigative work on this case than your entire intelligence division," she said pleasantly. "And I am the only person who knows exactly where the Covenant name is. Which means that until this is resolved, I am either your most valuable ally or the most dangerous loose end in your court's history. I would prefer we explore the first option." The silence was different this time, not weighted with threat. Something else moved through it, something that felt almost like the beginning of a different kind of reckoning. "If you help me," he said slowly, "you will be in Cerna's crosshairs." "I am already in Cerna's crosshairs," she said. "I have been since I moved those pages. The difference is that currently I am standing in them alone." He studied her for a very long moment. She let him, because she had nothing to hide, and because she had learned a long time ago that the best way to demonstrate trustworthiness was simply to stand still and let the other person look. "You will need protection," he said finally. "I assumed that would be part of the arrangement," she said. "My protection," he said, and the words carried something beneath them that she could not entirely decode, something old and specific in the way he said it, as though it meant more than the surface statement. "Yes," she said. "Then we have an accord," Dacian Dragomir said, and he extended his hand across the table in the way of the old courts, palm upward, which she knew from the documents meant an offer freely made, not a demand. She placed her hand in his, and the cold of his skin against her warmth, was something she was not entirely prepared for, not in a frightening way. In the way of something real and immediate pressing against the theoretical. "We have an accord," she said. The next 48 hours moved fast. Dacian relocated to a private residence 3 blocks from the Halcyon Institute, a townhouse that his court had maintained for decades as a London operational base. It was elegant without being ostentatious, all dark wood and high ceilings, and the kind of furniture that had been expensive when it was new and was now simply old money made physical. He sent 2 of his court operatives, a pair of vampires named Rukshan and Mira, who moved like shadows and spoke very little, to establish a perimeter around the archive and Sienna's nearby flat. Sienna accepted this with minimal protest, which surprised him. He had expected more resistance, more insistence on her independence. Instead, she reviewed the security arrangements with Rukshan and Mira with the same professional attention she brought to everything, asked 3 precise questions about communication protocols, and then returned to her research. What he had not expected was that she would begin appearing at the townhouse. The first time, she arrived at 11 in the evening with a canvas bag over one shoulder and a cold cup of coffee in hand, and she spread 3 sets of documents across his dining table and said, without preamble, "I found a secondary access attempt. Different encryption but the same base signature. Cerner has at least 1 collaborator inside the sanctioned archive system. I need to know which courts have treaty access to Halcyon," he told her. They spent 4 hours at the dining table, and at some point, one of his staff brought tea she did not ask for, and she drank it absently while cross-referencing treaty logs. He watched her work and found the experience unexpectedly absorbing. She came back the next night with more documents, and the night after that, by the end of the first week, it had become a pattern, and neither of them acknowledged it directly, which was its own kind of acknowledgement. He learned things about her in those evenings, not the facts she volunteered, but the small things that accreted around a person when they forgot they were being observed. She hummed under her breath when she was working through a particularly complex problem, a habit she was clearly unaware of. She had a fierce, habitual protectiveness toward every document she handled, smoothing pages flat with the automatic care of someone for whom paper was a living thing. When she was thinking, her hands went still. When she had found something, they moved immediately. She noticed things about him too. He could tell because she was a professional observer, and he was old enough to recognize when someone was paying attention beneath the surface of apparent focus. She noticed that he did not eat, which was expected, but she also noticed when he was unsettled, which was more perceptive than most of his court had managed in a century. She did not comment on either. What she did comment on, 11 days into their arrangement, was the obvious. "You are protecting me beyond what the accord requires," she said, not looking up from the document she was reading. He was standing by the tall window that faced the street, which he did often, watching the night city move. "Your security is central to the case," he said. "Rukshan and Mira handle my security," she said. "You are here every evening." Now she looked up. "I am not complaining. I am naming it because I find unnamed things uncomfortable." He turned from the window. The lamp on the table made warm light across her face and hands, and the contrast of it against the cold, dark room beyond the circle of that light was something he noticed with an awareness he had not invited. "You are comfortable naming things other people would leave unspoken," he said. "It is a professional habit," she said. "Archivists name things. That is the job. A document without a name is just paper." "And what name?" he asked. "Would you give to this?" She set her pen down and looked at him with the same clear directness she had brought to the first moment he had emerged from the shadows of her vault. "I do not know yet," she said honestly. "But I would like to find out." The silence and after that was warm rather than weighted, and he returned to his place at the table and did not go back to the window. On the 14th day, Vasil Cerner made his move. It came in the form of a formal document filed through the Pale Court's administrative office, a challenge of record stating that the Dragomir court had violated the blood law of 1847 by failing to disclose a sanctioned archive breach. This was, Sienna recognized immediately, an invented charge designed to force a tribunal and create the public political theater in which the covenant document and the true name could be introduced as evidence against Dacian. He is moving faster than I expected, she said, reading the challenge document at the townhouse. He must have found out that the archive was disturbed. One of the treaty access courts, Dacian said. He was standing very close to her, reading over her shoulder, which had become a comfortable spatial habit over the past 2 weeks. One of them told him, Miravan Court, Sienna said. Look at the filing timestamp. This was submitted from an address in their jurisdiction, and the legal language here uses a phrasing that appears in Miravan Treaty correspondence from the 1990s. She pointed. See that clause structure? The Miravan Court archivist used an almost identical syntax in a 1994 petition. He leaned in closer to see where she was pointing, and she was aware of the cold that came off him, not unpleasant, like stepping into a room where the stone walls had been cool for centuries. How? He said quietly. Do you know Miravan Treaty correspondence syntax? I read everything, she said. I read everything the first year. I did not sleep much. You are extraordinary, he said, and the word landed differently than she expected. Not admiringly in the superficial way she had heard men use it before, but with the weight of someone saying a true thing plainly. She looked up at him, and he was closer than she had realized, and for a moment neither of them moved. Then Ruxan appeared in the doorway. Lord Dragomir, the Sienna operative we identified last week has been spotted 1 block from the archive. The moment broke. Dacian straightened, and the predatory stillness came back into him, the court lord replacing whatever else had been present in that fraction of time. How many? He said. 3 that we can confirm. Pull Mira back to the archive entrance. I want nothing inside that building touched. He paused and looked at Sienna. You will stay here. The documents I need to prepare the tribunal response are at the archive, she said. Tell me which ones. I will have Mira retrieve them. She recognized the tone. Not commanding in the manner of someone who expected unquestioning obedience because of rank or power, but with the specific, focused urgency of someone who had just made a tactical assessment and reached a conclusion that genuinely prioritized her safety over her convenience. There was a difference, and she was good enough at reading people to feel it. The Sienna bloodline registry from 1940 to 1985, she said. The original Miravan Treaty addendum from 1902, and the sub-vault box labeled V7. The key is on the chain inside my top desk drawer. He relayed this to Ruxan and Mira with precise instructions, and then he turned back to her, and the focused intensity of his attention was entirely on her now. Vasil Sienna is not careful with people who get in his way, he said. The Vienna custodian and the Prague researcher were not killed quickly. He said it without dramatizing it, as a plain fact she needed to have. He will know you moved the transcript pages. He will want the location. I know, she said. Which means he will try to take you. I know that too, she said. Sienna. He said her name, and it was the first time he had used only her given name, and both of them noted it. I brought you into this danger by coming to the archive. You did not bring me into it, she said. I was already in it when I moved those pages 18 months ago. You just made it so that I am not in it alone. She paused. I would rather not be in it alone. He was looking at her with the particular quality of attention she had come to recognize over the preceding 2 weeks, the one that was not tactical assessment or political calculation, but something older and more personal, something that had been building quietly in the space between documents and late evenings and the slow accumulation of being seen. You will not be, he said. Simply, completely, in a way that felt like a different kind of covenant. The next 6 hours were the most dangerous of Sienna's life. Vasil Sienna did not wait for the tribunal. He sent 3 operatives to the townhouse at 3 in the morning. Having obtained the address through the Miravan Court's intelligence network, a betrayal that would have its own consequences later. They were not the careful, skilled operatives of the Dragomir Court. They were fast and violent and willing to cause damage, and they came through the back entrance of the building using a key that should not have existed. Dacian was in the entry hall when they came through the door. What happened next was brief and absolute. Sienna was at the end of the hall, and she saw enough to know that the careful, control-out man who had been sitting across from her at documents for 2 weeks was not the full picture of Dacian Dragomir. The full picture moved through 3 opponents in under 60 seconds with a ruthless efficiency that was entirely without anger or excess. He was not cruel. He was simply definitive. When it was over, and the three operatives were restrained and bound with the specialized silver-threaded cord ruksan produced from a case that had apparently always been in the front closet, Dacian turned and looked at Sienna across the length of the hall. She had her back against the wall. Her heart was moving fast. She was aware of it, but she was not shaking. She was watching him with clear, open eyes, absorbing the full reality of what he was, not the colleague across the table, but the apex predator, the ancient court lord, the creature of enormous and contained power, who had just ended a threat with the effortless precision of something that had been doing this for centuries. He walked toward her, and when he was close, he stopped, and she saw that his expression had the rare, unguarded quality of someone who was uncertain of what they would find on another person's face. "Are you hurt?" he said. "No," she said. "Are you afraid?" he said. And she understood that this was not the same question he had asked in the archive vault on the first night. This one was personal. She considered it honestly, because she had promised herself she would always be honest with him, and it had already become a habit she did not want to break. "Not of you," she said, "not even a little." Something moved through his face that she did not have a word for, but it settled into relief, and that was remarkable in itself, that he had been worried about how she would look at him. He reached up and tucked a strand of hair that had come loose during the chaos back from her face, a gesture so gentle after what she had just witnessed that it reoriented something in her chest, and he left his hand against her cheek for a moment, cool and careful. "I would like to name this now," she said quietly. "So would I," he said. She kissed him first. She had thought about it for approximately 5 days without doing anything about it, and the present moment had a clarity that cut through hesitation. She pressed up onto her toes and kissed him, and his response was immediate and complete, his hand moving from her cheek to her jaw, the other finding her waist, and he kissed her back with the full, deliberate attention he brought to everything. Unhurried, despite the 3 bound vampires in the hall behind them and the crisis that was still very much in progress. When they separated, he looked at her with something warm and certain in his burgundy eyes, the old coldness replaced by something that had clearly been there for days, waiting for her to name it first. "After this is resolved," he said, "I intend to pursue this with considerably more time and considerably fewer captive enemies in the hallway." "That seems reasonable," she said, and she was smiling, and so was he, which she suspected was not something that happened often enough on that precise, beautiful, formidable face. The tribunal convened 4 days later. The Pale Court met in its London chamber, which existed 4 levels beneath a private bank in the city, accessible through 3 layers of compulsion-protected doors, and one extremely bored-looking centuries-old vampire who functioned as the court usher. Sienna attended as the sanctioned human witness and official record holder, which gave her legal presence under the accord, and meant that Vasil Cerna could not challenge her inclusion. He tried anyway. She had expected that. Cerna was exactly what she had imagined from his record, a vampire who had been stripped of court standing and spent 4 decades nursing that wound into something dangerous. He was dark where Dacian was pale, shorter and tightly coiled, with the energy of someone who had been angry for so long it had become indistinguishable from his personality. He had 2 advocates beside him, and a court lord from the Mirovan bloodline sitting in the secondary seats as his supporting witness, which confirmed the Mirovan collaboration and complicated things considerably. The 3 court lords presiding, Aldrich of the Northern Pale, Severin of the Western Accord, and ancient Ileana, who was older than either of them, and never spoke above a murmur, but had never once been overruled in 700 years of court judgments, watched the proceedings with the patient attention of people for whom political drama was an extremely long-running theatrical production. Dacian presented first, with Sienna beside him and the sanctioned archive documents laid out in legally certified order. She had prepared the presentation with the methodical care she brought to every exhibition of primary sources, and watching her work in this context, Dacian found himself experiencing something he had not expected, a pride that was entirely separate from politics, a pride in her, in who she was, in the extraordinary mind that had spent 2 years building this case without knowing it would ever be needed. She named the access log dates. She named the IP signatures. She presented the Vienna and Prague death certificates, alongside the employment records, connecting both victims to the Cerner intelligence network. She presented the covenant document, the 1887 transcript, with the critical pages, and she presented the proof of document manipulation that Vasil Cerner had attempted in the archive system. Then she named the blood law violations, all 7 of them in precise legal order, citing chapter and clause of the Accord protocols in the language of the blood law itself, which she had learned from the source documents. The silence in the chamber when she finished was extraordinary. Old Ileana looked at Sienna for a long moment with eyes the color of dark amber that had seen centuries of court proceedings. Then she looked at Dacian with an expression that was close to something between approval and very dry amusement. "Your archivist," she said, "is more thorough than 3 of mine combined." "She is not my archivist," Dacian said, and then he looked at Sienna and amended, "That is to say, she is the Halcyon Institute's sanctioned representative." "Of course," Ileana said, and her tone suggested she was not fooled for a moment. Vasil Cerner's defense lasted 40 minutes and collapsed under the weight of its own contradictions. His advocate attempted to challenge the archive documents on procedural grounds, and Sienna countered each challenge with a specific citation from the Accord protocols that rendered the objection void, calmly and without visible satisfaction, which was itself a kind of devastation because it denied him the emotional response he had been trying to provoke. When Cerner himself spoke, which the court permitted under the old right of direct address, he directed himself at Sienna rather than at the presiding lords, which was a mistake born of frustration. He said that she was a human who had overstepped her sanctioned role, who had interfered in vampire court affairs beyond her mandate, and that any evidence she handled was therefore compromised by human bias and lack of standing. Dacian moved before he was entirely aware he had decided to, stepping forward and to the side, placing himself between Sienna and Cerner with an instinct that was older than thought and clearer than any tactical calculation. He did not raise his voice. He did not need to. "You will not address her that way," he said. The chamber was very quiet. "Lord Dragomir," Aldrich said carefully from the presiding bench, "she is a sanctioned representative of a treaty archive, present under Accord authority, and you will address her with the courtesy that status requires." Dacian said to Cerner. And the temperature in the room did the thing it did when he decided to stop being careful about the extent of his presence, the cold dropping and the air taking on the particular quality of standing in the path of something immovable and very old. "Or you will address her not at all." Cerner stared at him, a flash of what had driven 40 years of dangerous. Hidden work moved across his face, all that stripped pride and banked fury, and then he looked at Sienna behind Dacian's shoulder and read something in her expression that apparently told him what he had perhaps already known. He had miscalculated the nature of this particular human's relationship to this particular court lord. He had come expecting a political tool and found something he had no framework for, something the blood law had no precedent for, and it had already cost him everything. He sat down. The verdict took 6 minutes. All 7 blood law violations were upheld. The Mirovan Court's collaboration was referred for secondary investigation. Vasil Cerner was stripped of all residual Cerner bloodline claims, barred from the territories of all 3 signatory courts, and given a monitoring sentence under Pale Court supervision. The 2 surviving Cerner operatives from the townhouse received lesser sentences and were remanded to the Pale Court's custody. As the chamber cleared, old Ileana paused beside Sienna on her way out and said, in her dry murmur, "The blood law has no provision for a human of your capability. It was written in a time when they assumed such a person would not exist." She tilted her head. "I find that oversight worth correcting. You will receive a formal correspondence from my office." Sienna, who had stared down Dacian Dragomir in the vault and kept her composure through 3 attempted abductions and a full vampire court tribunal, felt the full weight of that arrive at once, and she said, "Thank you," with more genuine feeling than she had expected. Ileana smiled, which apparently she almost never did. "Thank you," she said, "for doing this properly." Outside the chamber, in the long stone corridor that led back through the compulsion-protected doors, Ruxin and Mira fell back several discreet paces, because they had known Dacian Dragomir for 60 years, and they recognized the particular quality of his attention when it was not directed at a political problem. "It is over," Sienna said. The relief was moving through her slowly, the way large things moved, like weather changing. "The case is over," Dacian said. He was walking beside her close enough that their arms occasionally brushed, a proximity neither of them manufactured and neither of them adjusted. "Is there a distinction?" she said. "I mentioned," he said, "that after this was resolved, I intended to pursue something with more time and fewer captive enemies." He paused. "I meant it." She stopped walking and looked at him. And he stopped beside her in the stone corridor, with the compulsion-lit wall, sconces, casting everything in amber and shadow, and she let herself look at him without the professional filter she had been maintaining since the beginning, without the archivist's assessment or the political calculation. She just looked at him, at the extraordinary face and the old eyes and the way he stood, always angled slightly toward her, as though proximity to her was a thing his body had decided on without consulting the rest of him. "4 weeks ago you came to my archive to silence me," she said. "I did," he said. "And now you are standing in a vampire court corridor suggesting you would like to pursue something." "I am," he said. "That is," she said, "a remarkable change of events." "You are a remarkable person," he said. And again it landed the way it had the first time, weighted with truth and without the performance of flattery. "You are the most remarkable person I have met in a very long time, and I have had a long time to accumulate the comparison." She laughed, and the laugh surprised her, rising up and escaping before she could decide whether it was appropriate. And then she found she did not particularly care whether it was appropriate, because it felt good and real in the stone corridor after everything that had happened. He smiled, and she had now seen him smile 4 times, and she was keeping count because it was that rare and that worth keeping. "Come for dinner," she said. "I know you do not eat, but I do, and I would like to have you in the room when I do, in a context that is not a political crisis." "Yes," he said, without hesitation and without any of the careful maneuvering she had come to expect from someone navigating centuries of court politics. Just yes, clean and certain. "Tonight," she said. "Tonight," he agreed. She cooked, which she was good at in the uncomplicated way of someone who had learned because they enjoyed it and not for anyone else's benefit. Her flat was organized the way her archive was organized, with an underlying logic that rewarded attention and defeated casual observation. Books everywhere, a desk that was partially a second kitchen table, plants that had no business surviving, given how little direct sunlight reached the windows but survived anyway because she talked to them occasionally when she was thinking. Dacian arrived at 7. He brought wine, which was either a reflex of old hospitality or careful attention to what she might want, and when she said so, he admitted it was the second thing, that he had asked Myra what she drank, and been told she had mentioned a particular Burgundy once, and he had found it. The fact that he had done that, the deliberate, specific care of it, settled somewhere in her chest and stayed. They sat at her kitchen table after dinner, with the wine between them and the rain starting outside the window, and talked in the way they had been building toward for weeks. Not about documents or blood law or court politics, but about themselves. He told her about the early centuries, the long, strange process of understanding what immortality meant, how it changed relationship to grief and time. She told him about the 2 years alone in the archive before she understood what she had found, the particular feeling of sitting with a massive secret and not knowing whether anyone would ever believe her. "Were you afraid?" he asked. "When you first understood what you had found?" "Terrified," she said, "for about a week. And then the archivist part of me took over and I started making lists." He was looking at her with the expression she had begun to love, the one that was particular to her, that she had not seen him direct at anyone else, warm and intent, and with the quality of someone who had spent a very long time looking at things from behind glass and had recently found the door. "Tell me about the lists," he said. So she did. She told him about 18 months of self-education and careful documentation, and the specific terror-infused discipline of knowing that she was holding something that could get her killed and choosing to be rigorous about it anyway, because the alternative was to destroy the document or pretend she had not seen it, and she had never once been able to pretend she had not seen something. "You could have destroyed the transcript pages," he said. The Covenant name. If you had destroyed them, Cerner would have had nothing to work with. I thought about it, she said, for about 45 minutes. But destroying a primary source document is something I am physically incapable of. It would have been like cutting off one of my hands. She paused. And also it would not have solved the larger problem, which was that someone was looking for the information, and destroying one copy does not destroy the need that drove the search. So instead you moved them and waited for the problem to arrive. I moved them and prepared to receive the problem when it arrived, she said. There is a distinction. He smiled again. That was 5 now. Yes, he said, there is. She reached across the table and took his hand, not for any particular reason beyond wanting to, and his fingers folded around hers with the careful, definite quality that characterized everything he did, and they stayed like that for a while, with the rain outside and the wine between them, and all the documents and danger and ancient history settled into the background of something that was simply present and true. I have never been involved with a human, he said later, when the rain had gotten heavier. It was not a warning. It was a fact offered for honest examination. I have never been involved with a vampire, she said. We are both working with incomplete information. My world is not safe, he said. Court politics, blood law, territorial disputes. What happened with Cerner will not be the last time someone attempts to use me through the people around me. I know, she said. I have read 400 years of your court's records. I know what the life looks like. She looked at him steadily. I am not asking for safe, I am asking for real. You would be giving up a great deal, he said quietly. What would I be giving up, she said. That compares to this. The question sat between them, not rhetorical but genuine, and he looked at her with the full weight of his attention, and she felt it the way she had felt it from the beginning, like standing in the presence of something immense that had chosen to be careful with her specifically. Nothing, he said. I cannot think of anything. Neither can I, she said. He lifted her hand from the table and held it between both of his, and looked at it for a moment, at the ink still faintly visible on her wrist, the archivist's mark, and then he pressed his lips to her knuckles with the formal grace of old court tradition. Then we are in accord, he said, with the deliberate echo of their first agreement, and she heard all the difference between that accord and this one. We are, she said. The weeks that followed were the best weeks of Sienna Sterling's life, which she recognized as a bold claim and made it anyway. She moved through the work of her days at the Halcyon Institute with a new dimension to everything. Old Ileana's correspondence arrived 3 days after the tribunal. A formal proposal that Sienna be designated as the first human court liaison in Pale Court history. A role that had never existed and that Ileana was apparently creating specifically because the tribunal had demonstrated its necessity. The proposal went to the Halcyon Institute's board, who spent 4 hours in emergency session trying to understand the implications. And then they called Sienna in and asked her if she wanted to do it. She said yes before they finished the sentence. The Dragomir court became a regular part of her professional life in ways that created the kind of gentle, regular contact that was its own form of intimacy. She worked with Dacian's court archivist on a secure cataloging project for the Dragomir records, which meant that she and Dacian had institutional reasons to meet frequently, which neither of them had arranged and both of them appreciated. Rooksan, who had never been what she would describe as warm, but was deeply protective in the way that a very good guard dog was deeply protective, began bringing her tea when she worked late at the townhouse. She was not sure when the townhouse had become a place she went without specific reason, only that it was comfortable and that Dacian was there. Mira, who turned out to be dryly funny beneath the operational efficiency, told Sienna one evening that Dacian had not had anyone at the townhouse in 40 years. 40 years, Sienna repeated. He is very particular, Major said. Also, most people are afraid of him. He is not frightening, Sienna said. Mira looked at her with the specific expression of someone whose lived experience strongly contradicted this statement. He is profoundly frightening, she said. You are simply the one person for whom that does not apply. She paused. He finds it extraordinary. He mentions it occasionally. Do not tell him I said that. Sienna did not tell him, but she thought about it, about the specificity of that, of being the one person for whom his particular formidable nature was simply a fact and not a source of fear. She thought about it because she recognized the equivalent. She was the one person who had faced him in that vault and not moved, and for the same reason he had not been afraid of her capability or her knowledge or the position she put him in. There was no threat between them. There had never been a threat between them, not really. What had looked like threat from the outside was something else from the inside. 2 months after the tribunal, on a November evening when London had gone cold, and the street lamps made pale circles in the fog, she arrived at the townhouse to find Dacian standing in the study with something in his hands. He was looking at it, and when she came in he looked up, and she saw something in his expression she had not seen before, a careful, particular vulnerability. He held it out toward her. It was an old coin, silver and worn smooth with age, with markings that she recognized after a moment as old court script. "This is a Dragomir court token," she said. "First generation. These were only given to members of the blood circle in the original court." She looked up. "There are 7 of them in existence." 6, he said. "One was given to the founding custodian of the court archive, the first human who served the Dragomir line and was recognized as belonging to the court's protection. The coin is a physical declaration of that." He paused. "It has not been given since the original. The tradition became obsolete when the human custodian lines died out." She looked at the coin in her hand and then at him. "This is a formal gesture," she said. "It is," he said. "It means that you are under the protection of the Dragomir court by my direct declaration that you are recognized by the court as belonging to it, not as a servant or a possession. The tradition was never that, but as someone the court claims a bond with." He held her gaze. "It is the most formal declaration the court has for what you already are to me." She turned the coin over in her hand and felt the weight of centuries in it, the old promise worn smooth, the specific gravity of a thing that had been held carefully for a very long time. "What the court has," she said, "or what you have." "Both," he said, "but the second one first." She crossed the room and handed the coin back to him, and he looked briefly uncertain, which was such a rare expression on him that it made something tender move through her. "Put it in my pocket," she said. "I want it from your hand." He looked at her, and the uncertain expression resolved into something far warmer, and he reached forward and tucked the coin into the front pocket of her jacket, his hand resting there for a moment over the slight weight of it. "There is something else," he said. "The pale court liaison role Ileana created for you. She sent a secondary correspondence to me this week." He paused. "The formal court liaison role, if accepted at the full level, would require you to be recognized as a member of the Pale Court's protected circle, which has certain implications." "What kind of implications?" Sienna said. "Longevity," he said carefully. "The Pale Court has methods, old and very rare, for extending a human's lifespan when that human has become integral to court functions. It is not immortality. It is not turning. It is something older, a blood bond with the court itself, not with any individual vampire, that slows mortality significantly." He was watching her face. "You would live considerably longer, centuries likely, not forever, but considerably longer than a natural human lifespan." She was quiet for a moment. "And you are telling me this," she said slowly, "in the context of what you just gave me." "I am telling you this," he said, "because I want you to have the choice with full information, because any decision about your own life should be made with complete knowledge and without pressure from me." His jaw was tight. "I am also telling you that the prospect of losing you to time, when I have only just found you, is something I have been sitting with for 2 months and not mentioning, because it was not my right to mention it yet." She reached up and put her hand against his chest, over the still place where a human heartbeat would have been, and felt the solidity of him, the specific reality of this person she had come to love over 4 months of danger and documents and late evenings and honest conversation. "You had the right," she said. "You have always had the right to be honest with me. That is the whole basis of this." "I know," he said. "I was afraid." She looked up at him, at the old, extraordinary face that very few people had ever seen afraid. "Of what?" she said. "That telling you the truth of it would feel like pressure," he said. "That you would make the choice for me rather than for yourself." "Dacian," she said, and his name in her mouth had the weight of the coin in her pocket. Old and specific and worn smooth, with the particular care of something meant to last. Listen to me carefully. I have read everything. I have read what this life looks like. I have read what your world costs, and what it asks for, and what it gives. I have sat with all of it." She paused. "And I have also sat with 4 months of you, which is a different kind of evidence." He covered her hand on his chest with his own. "The answer," she said, "is yes. To the liaison role, to the court circle, to all of it. Not because of you specifically, although partly because of you, but because the work is the most important work I have ever done, and because I am very good at it, and because I have no interest in doing it for 30 more years and then leaving." She looked at him steadily. "And because I want time with you. More time than I have without the bond." "Sienna," he said. And the way he said it was the way the documents could not teach, a specific intimacy of tone that was only for her, that had only ever been for her. "We are in accord," she said. He kissed her then. Not the brief, urgent press of the hallway after the fight, but something long and thorough and certain, his hands at her face, and her hands in the lapels of his coat, the coin warm in her pocket against her side from the heat of his touch. And London moved through its foggy November, outside the tall windows of a townhouse that had become, without formal declaration, something like home. 3 weeks later, in the pale court chamber 4 levels below the city bank, with old Ileana presiding and Ruxan and Mira as court witnesses, Sienna Sterling accepted the pale court liaison role, the Dragomir court token as its formal accompaniment, and the blood bond with the court circle that Ileana administered with an economy of ceremony, and a very small smile that Sienna had learned to read as the equivalent of extravagant warmth from anyone else. Dacian stood beside her through the ceremony with his hand at the small of her back, which was not required by protocol and which neither of them commented on. Afterward, in the corridor, Ileana paused beside them and said to Dacian, with the 700 years of dry wit she had accumulated, "You are aware that in accepting the liaison role she is technically a member of the Pale Court's administrative body, and therefore outranks approximately 40% of the vampire nobility in procedural matters." "I know," Dacian said. "Does this bother you?" Ileana said. "Not remotely," he said, and the pride in his voice was entirely sincere. Ileana looked at Sienna. "He has not said a genuinely unguarded thing in my presence in 2 centuries, she said. "You have made a remarkable difference in the court's political atmosphere." "I read everything," Sienna said. "It helps." Ileana's small smile stayed. "It does," she said. "Welcome to the court, Archivist Sterling." In the corridor afterward, walking out into the city street where London's November had given way to the first cold edge of December, Sienna tucked herself against Dacian's side in the practical way of someone who found the cold of him neither alarming nor unpleasant, and he pulled her close in the equally practical way of someone who had decided that proximity to this particular person was a thing he intended to maintain for a very long time. "You realize," she said, watching her breath fog in the cold air, "that I will eventually need access to the full Dragomir archive for the liaison work. The complete records. I assumed you had already read them," he said. "Not all of them. The most recent 300 years are in your personal court vault." "Then I will give you access," he said. "You would give me access to your entire court archive," she said. "You already have my court token in your pocket," he said. "You have had Ruxan bringing you tea for 6 weeks. You are a formal member of the Pale Court administrative body. At what point do you suppose the archive access becomes the less significant gesture?" She laughed, and it went up into the cold December air and dissolved, and he made the small sound he had begun making when she laughed. Something between warmth and wonder, as though it was still remarkable to him after 4 months. "You are very old," she said, "and it surprises you when I laugh." "You are the only person in several decades who makes me want to," he said plainly. The surprise is not that you laugh, the surprise is what it does." She stopped on the pavement and turned to look at him, and he stopped beside her with the city moving all around them, human and ancient and indifferent to the particular small miracle occurring in its fog. "Tell me," she said. "It makes everything," he said carefully, with the exactness of someone choosing words the way she chose document handling, with full attention and specific care, feel like a beginning. The coin was in her pocket. His hand was at her back. The court had been witnessed and recorded. Every thread drawn, closed and sealed, every danger named and answered, every act of hidden motive met by the documented truth, She kissed him on a London pavement in the first week of December, under the same sky that covered the archive where it had all begun, with the cold fog around them and the whole long future ahead, and the ancient, regal, formidable lord of the Dragomir court, who had come to the Halcyon Institute to silence an archivist and found, instead, the one person in the world who already knew his weakness, held her as though she was a document irreplaceable and extraordinary, and finally, precisely, home. He had come to silence her. She had already known his weakness. They had both, in the end, been thoroughly undone by the other, and found it entirely worth the cost of everything it took to get there. The archive was waiting. The records were intact. The covenant was sealed not in blood law, but in something older and less breakable. In two people who had looked at each other clearly across a dangerous table, and chosen, with full information and open eyes, to stay. That was the accord that mattered. That was the one that would last.